I would like to introduce you to 5-year-old me. And I think everybody's, to a greater or lesser extent, has got a 5-year-old me inside them. Whether we refer to it as our inner child or an embodiment of something else, that's an individual thing. The whole idea of the 5-year-old me is that it embodies a range of things. There's some really good things about 5-year-old me. 5-year-old me is an element of innocence, an element of empathy, an element of creativity and inspiration. People often talk about letting out your inner child, and I do that a lot of the times. A lot of the times I have no choice. It just breaks out and takes over. However, 5-year-old me also can embody doubt, fear, even terror of certain things that we have to deal with in the world. So in this particular case, this is kind of one of the main things that I'm going to be talking about today. This is 5-year-old me that has that level of uncertainty, that level of just not feeling totally comfortable. And this is something that a lot of us have to deal with. So to start off, I need to present you with a paradox. I'm not actually qualified to present this talk. I'm not, a industry veteran who's presenting, suitable to present us with a keynote speech. I'm not a composer that's worked on AAA projects and had soundtracks sold worldwide that we all know about. I'm not an audio director. I don't own or wear a cowboy hat. So in some ways, one of the biggest problems is that maybe I should get somebody else up here to actually present this talk. And therein lies continually the paradox. For context, to do this presentation, I need to talk about myself. Now, this in itself is actually quite interesting because I'm also going to be talking about cultural differences. And a week ago when I presented this in Australia. Now, what a lot of you may not realise is that talking about yourself in Australia is really risky. And I mean that seriously. As a society, we are very self-deprecating. Because frankly, if you're not, people try to tear you apart. America doesn't quite have that issue. But it's still this thing of like, well, you've got to be careful when you're talking about yourself because, it's like, hey, I'm really awesome and I can do this and I'm fantastic and I'm rich and all this. It's very, very easy to come across as being, frankly, a bit of a wanker. So, I want to talk about 2015, which has just flown off the top of the page. So in 2015, I've actually had quite a significant year for me. I've created and launched 2 sound effects libraries that I spent time working on. I've created a Unity demo game for education. I'm not a developer, I'm a sound guy, so that was like, hey, great, I did that. I worked on 3 reasonably sized games, did a fair bit of content, still working on some of them. And I did some travel this year to England and Germany and Norway and Finland and New Zealand and the USA. By the end of this year, I will have travelled over 1/3 of the way to the moon. 5 laps of the planet. And I've done a bunch of other things, written some articles, met some incredible people, spoken at various conferences, and commenced production of an audio app. Yay me. Look at all these things I've done. How does all this make me feel? Standing up here, presenting to you what I've achieved this year. Yeah. And whilst there are things that I'm proud of, and whilst I'm feeling like I'm achieving things, it doesn't stop the fact that a lot of the time, I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, but, what does it matter? What did I achieve? Is it important? Because 5-year-old me sits there, it's like, All right, so we need a definition. Imposter syndrome. This is what we are talking about. Those with the syndrome remain convinced that they are frauds and do not deserve the success they have achieved. And I've spoken to quite a few people about this. Do not deserve any of the success that they have achieved. Because the problem is that we're surrounded by everybody else, and this is how we perceive everyone else. The inner me, the 5-year-old me, is convinced that everybody else, all the people that we're surrounded by, they're the adults. And how do children perceive adults? Adults are smarter than us. Adults are bigger than us, stronger than us, more capable than us, able to, tell us what to do. They're authority figures. They are experts. In a lot of cases, if we're talking about parents, their word is not even just law. Quite often, their word is God, if you believe in that. There's a line from a very good graphic novel that I think Mother is the name for God in the lips and hearts of all children. But we make a bunch of assumptions, and assumptions are really dangerous things. We assume that we know less than others. And we assume that what we know is of lesser value. And therefore, what we do is of lesser value. We also assume, like with a lot of problems, that we're the only people who have this problem. And this is something that is such a bizarre thing with humans in general. We all seem to have these little issues with the way our brains work and the way our hearts work and the way our spirits work. And we're so bad at communicating with each other half the time about the stuff that matters. You know, the things you don't talk about in civilized company, politics, religion, sex, so all the important things. So how on earth do we ever learn anything from each other if all we're talking about is the weather? It's really, really hard to slip in that you're feeling a little bit down when all you're talking about is the weather. It's cloudy, like my moods. So, here's a little bit of a representation. This is not specifically me, but for the moment we'll use it as me. I've decided I know some things, and here are some things that I know. I know some location recording, I know some sound design, and I know some composition. There you go, there's some stuff that I know. Whether they're skills, whether it's knowledge, whether it's experience, it doesn't really matter. They're all kind of applicable. Let's throw some other people into the mix. We've got the red person who knows some programming, some orchestration, and some scripting. I don't know any of those. They're all new to me. The green person knows some sound engines, some VO, direction, and some composition. There's a shared thought there. We both know composition. The orange one knows location recording. There's another shared idea. Production, and they're a musician. The thing is that what generally happens is if we're in a conversation with, say, 4 people, you're listening to what they're saying. They're listening to each other, of course, but all you're caring about really is your point of reference to them. And you hear the red person talking about programming. I don't know anything about programming. It's completely beyond me. They've got knowledge that I don't have. The green person talks about sound engines, and again, you don't understand that, but talks about composition. I do know some about composition. But that bit they're talking about now, I don't know. They obviously know more about composition than I do. And same with the orange person. And so there's a conversation that happens about location recording, and a conversation that happens about programming, and a conversation that happens about production. And while you're sitting there listening to all these people describing all these various different things that cover those topics, you do this. You assume that every single person in the room knows about programming and orchestration and scripting and sound engines and VO direction and composition and sound design and location recording, etc., etc. And the reason why is because what's probably happening is the same thing to every person in the room. So the guy who's talking about programming is talking about programming, and everybody else is going, so you're just assuming they're nodding their heads, they know about programming. They're all experts at programming. Every single person in this conversation, except me, is an expert in programming. And orchestration and scripting and sound engine, VO and composition. So you've convinced yourself that whilst you may know 3 things, They all know everything, and probably the fact that they all know location recording better than you, they all know sound design better than you, and they all know composition better than you. To simplify that, we have this. What we know versus what everybody else knows. I actually don't have inserted here another slide of the 5-year-old, but it'd probably be a good time to put it back in. No wonder we do this to ourselves. Because we've just convinced ourselves that there is no possible way we can compete with the other people in the room, because every single one of them is the love child of Einstein and Stephen Hawking sort of, melded together as some sort of gestalt intellect. Here's something I downloaded off the internet. This one's quite cute. This is sort of the daily routine of a musician. Now, I would actually alter that slightly. I would alter that slightly for a developer. Where there's practice, you could probably put, productive work. And that big green area, I'd probably put in something like fighting with the tools or rebooting your computer or something like that. But yeah, this is one of those things where it's typical for creative people. That they spend so much of their time just going, I'm not worthy, I can't do this, I'm not worthy. Now, what's actually interesting is it's actually not just creative people, but I will get to that in a little bit. Proof of success is diminished as luck. Now, I sort of have started a little bit of a crusade on this word because I don't like it. I did recently talk to a very wise man, Mr. Brian Schmidt, and we had quite a lengthy conversation about this, and I did actually give a little bit of ground on that. I will accept luck in one form, and that luck pretty much applies to everybody in this room. The fact that we're here is a sign of luck, but that luck is the luck of the parents we've been born to in the country that we've been born in. Is pretty much what's allowed most of us to be here. Not everyone, but most of us to be here. Because frankly, if we'd been born in a very, very primitive culture or a war-torn culture or a culture where there was serious health problems where just getting to the age of 20 or 30 is a miracle, then the chances of us being here are greatly reduced. So that I will completely concede is something that I will quite happily call luck. Apart from that, I hate this word. And the reason why I hate this word is because it diminishes almost completely everything that everybody does, both good and bad. If you end up in hospital from a car accident, was it bad luck, or was it basically that some other idiot was driving irresponsibly and put you there? Saying it's bad luck completely exonerates them of any blame. In the same way, if you've just landed a job of your dreams working for an amazing company, having somebody turn around and go, wow, that was lucky. Yeah, no, thanks, it wasn't. I've worked my rear off for a very long time to acquire the skills. Oh yeah, but you were lucky to be in the right place at the right time. No, actually I planned that. I worked very hard at going to all the conferences, making sure I talked to all the right people. Oh, well, you were lucky to talk to the right person. No, I did some research and made sure that the people that I talked to were the right people. I then did some research to make sure that my social skills were good enough that I could actually talk to them without coming across as being needy or whiny or pushy or a bad salesperson. When somebody says to you that you're lucky, don't let them get away with it. I mean, literally, I've actually had people say to myself and my partner, my wife, that oh, you guys are lucky to have a great relationship. No, we put a lot of bloody effort into having a good relationship. Like anything, whether it's learning to run a marathon, learning to play a piano, learning to be good at speaking and presentations, I've been doing this for 10 years. It takes effort. Everything takes effort. Anything we do takes effort. Anything that's worth doing takes a lot of effort. So if people start throwing the luck word around in your direction, throw it back at them and explain to them why it's just not suitable. Sometimes I lie awake at night and I ask, where have I gone wrong? And then a voice says to me, this is going to take more than one night. I'm kind of glad I could find a Charlie Brown reference. So here's one of the issues we have. We are living in a competitive world, and it's a very connected world. Technically, everybody in this room is competing with each other to a greater or lesser extent. If there are X number of jobs or opportunities available, then, there's a little bit of competition that goes on. That itself is not so much the problem. The problem is that the connected world that we have says that you must be smart, you must be beautiful, you must be talented, you must be rich. And more to the point, we're doing the same sort of thing we've done before. Everybody's more beautiful than I am, everybody's richer than I am, everybody's more successful than I am, everybody's smarter than I am. And the reality is, if you start looking at things these days, there are cover models and celebrities coming out and going, no, actually, I don't look like that. Even when I'm on set, I don't look like that. Even when I've got all my makeup on, I don't look like that. They've photoshopped me. There's been a couple of celebrities recently who've actually forbidden magazines from photoshopping them because they're getting annoyed that they can't even live up to their own image. That's just ridiculous. And so we've got this situation where we've got the media who are trying to sell things, period. Advertising is about trying to sell you stuff. And if they can't sell you something, if they've got something that they don't think they're making enough money, they will create a need for it. Diamonds used to be practically worthless a couple of hundred years ago. They were used for industrial purposes in mining. And Tiffany's decided, let's start an advertising campaign and basically say, hey, diamonds are a girl's best friend and you have to have a diamond ring for a wedding, etc., etc. They created a need that never existed. Massively successful. But now there's this insane pressure on the world. I mean, think about it for a second. Think about the pressure that's put on women to have a really gorgeous diamond ring. Think about the pressure put on a man or a partner to buy their partner a shiny diamond ring for the wedding because otherwise you're both failures. It's a rock. And I would argue that almost anybody in this room could barely tell the difference if I smash some glass. Most people on the planet couldn't, and yet we do this. We do this with a whole bunch of things. And so how can we compete with this? We've actually got a phenomenon where we've got a very large proportion of the human race whose job it is to manipulate the other half of the human race into basically constantly being miserable about their lives because there is no possible way you can live up to the expectations. There will always be somebody richer than you. There will always be somebody who can run faster than you. There will always be somebody who is better looking than you. And even if you're the most beautiful person in the world, there will always be somebody who photoshops you so that your picture looks better than you could ever look. So there is a competition, a pressure, a complete detachment from reality that is applied to all of us. Any wonder that our 5-year-olds are all sitting there going, holy crap, I'm not coming out. So, perhaps there's an alternate perspective about all of this. And I found this on the internet, and I quite like this. Now, I do actually have to pause on this one for a sec, because there's a very interesting consequence from giving the talk a week ago. There's quite a few people who were putting out Twitters during the thing, and somebody put out a Twitter going, I'm at the talk on imposter syndrome and I feel like an imposter because I don't suffer from imposter syndrome. So this is the thing. This is kind of like any sort of talk that is aimed at trying to make people feel better about a certain thing. But that doesn't mean I'm trying to make people who don't have that certain thing feel bad. You know, if I'm in a room sort of, helping people with adjustment from, ending up in a wheelchair, so I'm going, no, you can do anything, you're awesome. I don't want the guy over there who's still got functioning legs to go, oh my God, I've got to go rip off both my legs. That's not the point. There will be people here who don't suffer from imposter syndrome. That's not a bad thing. What I'm trying to get across is that potentially if you do suffer from it, it's also not necessarily negative. There can be positives to it. Like anything, it depends on how you approach it, how you think about it, just your attitude, I guess. And in fact, it was actually a Mr. Austin Wintory that kind of gave me this perspective. I don't think he's in here. He's around the conference somewhere, but I don't think he's in here. I spoke to Austin. And in fact, I sent him an email. Brian suggested I send a few people emails, and I talked to a few people about it. I sent an email to Austin with the tagline, Imposter Syndrome. And then, hello, Austin. Brian said I should contact you and just ask you about this. What are your thoughts? And the response from Austin was like, how did you know? You found me. I was always afraid somebody... So this is something that Austin has basically been waiting for years to somebody to walk up, tap him on the shoulder and ask him to leave the stage. Sorry, Mr. Wintry, you'll have to come with us off the stage. We've discovered you finally. There you go. But we had a bit of a talk via email, and he liked this as a bit of an alternate perspective. Because ambition is not a negative thing. It drives us. Seriously, without ambition, trust me, I know some people without ambition. It's a bit tragic. They really, and I mean that in a sincere way. It's just like some of them barely have a reason to get out of bed in the morning. It constantly raises the bar. I personally find myself very ambitious. Sure, I'd like to have money. I agree with Chance. I'm not doing this just for the art. I would like to have money. But for me, money is a tool. Money is the tool that allows me to do the things I want to do. As Chance said, like if I've got money and I'm not having to worry about doing other things, I can concentrate on the things that I'm passionate about, which in this case is sound, music, etc. Sure, I'd like to have a nice car, etc. But those are added extras. They're not the goal. I'm ambitious in what I want to achieve, the people I want to work with, the projects I want to work on. I don't see many negatives in that, other than sleepless nights and a bit of stress. There's also ego involved. Frankly, there's ego involved in everything we do. It is real for all of us, to a greater or lesser extent. Like a lot of things, it's how we deal with it. But our ego is a part of what we do, and a part of why we do it. It's a part of our creativity. Think about what we are doing. Seriously, we're creating music, we're creating sound. We're in the entertainment, if I use a broader term and talk about the entertainment industry, we create. We create things, and generally to be creative, especially with things like music being the language of emotion, we fairly literally are reaching inside, taking a part of us out there, moulding it in some way so it's inappropriate, putting it up so that everybody can see it and saying, there you go, that's for you. I did that. Let me know what you think. Tear it apart, but please don't. And I would argue, the more you do that, the better the results you're going to get. If you shield this, how are you going to communicate with other people? We are sharing a part of ourselves. All right, so I want to give everybody a bit of a reality check, because we've talked about this and talked about imposter syndrome, and a few of us are obviously, it's obviously maybe not important, but it's at least on the minds of some of the people here, otherwise you wouldn't be here. So I did a bit of research. Tina Fey, she's kind of a little bit successful, and she seriously suffers from imposter syndrome. And so does this guy, Mr. Coldplay. And yeah, there's another, I think she does a bit of acting as well. Don Cheadle, another actor. And another actor. And, Denzel Washington, he's a bit of a hack, isn't he? And a bunch of other people. And the one on the end is actually Margaret Chan. She's the head of the World Health Organization. You don't get into a position like that unless you're really, really good at what you do. And at this point, I gave up, because I started looking through Google of imposter syndrome, I wonder who it affects. And the list just went on and on and on, and the names were just A-lists, top of the pile. The other thing that I'd also discovered that it's actually not just creative people. There are technology programmers, there are people in science, there are people in all sorts of very high profession, very high competence things who seriously suffer from imposter syndrome, who seriously doubt. People in ridiculous positions of skill, authority, accomplishment, who literally wake up every morning wondering when somebody's going to tap them on the shoulder and send them off the stage to stand with Austin. All right. So now we're going to just take a brief break from this, and I'm going to play a video. And the video is actually very, very relevant to this topic, and it's going to be used to express a few points. But it's also just something that I think we need to watch.
Okay there, bud. We're gonna take this nice and slow. Here we go. Oh, here we go. Position 3, no, 4. All right, it's go time. It's go time. Come on, buddy. Yes, it worked. Sorry. That's my fault. Yeah, I'm on it. Position 4, 3. Amazing! The wind in my cheat! Stop! No! Oh gosh! Oh God! Oh no! All right, okay, you gotta angle yourself. Okay, no. Come back down towards me. Come back down. Now! Come on.
Now, I mean this generally about entertainers and the entertainment industry, so everybody in this room. What we do, we make dragons. We make dragons. Seriously. And what we do, when I gave this talk last week, I talked through this bit. I don't even think I need to here. I think all of these get the point across. Seriously, guys. Now, I actually played a game very, very recently. This game has been sitting on my shelf months, over a year, and I hadn't played it. every time I looked at it, I went, not yet. I'm not ready to play it yet. I played other games. Played most of those, all of those actually. But I wasn't ready to play this one. And then last week, after talking to a certain person on email, I looked at that game and I went, now's the right time. So I played it. Austin Wintory is afraid that he's a fraud. If anybody sees him, pass on from me, he's not. There's not even a shadow of a doubt of that. And that applies to every single person who worked on every single project, on every single one of those slides. More importantly, what does everybody in this room do? Basically, our job description is pretty much through doing no harm to anybody, we bring people joy. I'm kind of a bit amazed that we're not all amazingly self-righteously arrogant about what we do, because we probably deserve to be. We do no harm and we bring people joy. I think I can live with that. And the joy that I get out of playing these things and the joy I've gotten out of playing these games since I was under 10, so crikey, longer than some of you have been alive, I get immense joy out of playing these things. I get to escape. The 5-year-old literally comes out whether I want him to or not and reigns supreme. One more time, we make dragons. So John Powell, this guy, well, the guy that did the music that we just listened to, there's a couple of reasons why this is relevant. The first time I ever heard about imposter syndrome was a friend of mine in LA 2 years ago. And she mentioned she'd gone to a masterclass with John Powell. This is the guy that's done How to Train Your Dragon and a whole bunch of other big-name movies. And at this particular masterclass, John Powell pretty much put his hand up and said, yeah, I spend an awful lot of my time feeling really, really bad, that I'm not good enough. John Powell suffers from imposter syndrome. It's the first person I ever heard of in regard to this. So it's relevant from that point of view. It's relevant from another point of view. Somebody gave me a very, very good outlook. Pause. My brain needs water, Chance. There we go, get those extra 14%. A friend of mine gave me a really, really interesting one in that there's another way to approach this, is that what you do is you use a bit of a tool to kind of cope with this whole thing. Obviously, there's a spectrum. Imposter syndrome is probably fairly down on the low end that you probably want to avoid. But the other end, of course, is being a bit of an egotistical tosser, which we want to avoid. So he said the suggestion was that you have 2 scores or 2 books or 2 films that you use as reference. You know, for musicians, it would be scores. So for me, I'll use the term of scores. And if there's ever a point where you think you're getting a bit cocky and you're thinking a bit too much of yourself, a bit too highly of yourself, so in my case, if I'm thinking, yeah, I'm really hot stuff, I just play that clip I just showed you. It's a reality check for me like that. It's like, I'm never going to be that. And I'm so glad that that exists. And this is the other thing, I don't want to be the top of the pile. Where do you get inspiration from when you're the top of the pile? So for me, How to Train Your Dragon is how I will always prevent myself from ever getting too egotistical. The flip side, however, is if I'm ever feeling too down, if I'm ever really feeling doubt about myself that maybe I can't cut it, maybe I'm just not good enough as a composer, maybe I really am a fraud, I just think of anything that Kenny G has ever written and I just feel so much better about myself. Guy made lots of money. I don't care. So again, we have tools to balance this out. So as I've said, is it actually bad it can have bad effects. Too much ice cream can have bad effects, but I'm not going to stop eating it. It keeps the ego in check. That actually can be not a bad thing. We need some ego. We just don't need it, controlling how we act and what we do. Maybe not for everybody, but for me, it really makes me work hard. I've got to keep doing more work to keep away from those guys who are about to tap me on the shoulder. Again, I think it's related to ambition. Because that's that kind of thing. If you weren't ambitious, would you actually care that somebody thought you were a fraud? Well, it wouldn't matter. If somebody's going to tap you on the shoulder, it's like, tap me on the shoulder, I don't care, I'm off the stage. I was never wanted to be here. Hey, Austin. It's just... So I think this is the thing. For me, it really does make me work hard because I'm really, really wanting to, in a lot of ways, kind of compete with all you guys, but not in the point of view where I can say, I'm better than you and I'm better than you. It's more a case of like, wow, you're really good at that and that's really cool and I want to be that good. And in some ways, I kind of like the fact that there is no possible way I can ever be as good as everybody in the room. I probably can't even be as good as half the people in the room by themselves. But by understanding that, I can go, well, you know what? I want to be as good as a musician as you, and I want to be as good a vocal editor or director as you, and I want to be as good a musician as you, and as good a sound designer as you. I want to be as good a speaker as Scott Selfon. All these things, I see those as positives. I think it also helps you play well with others. Partially, the humble thing is fairly useful because you don't come across as being arrogant. The working hard thing, as long as you do it in the context I've just given, generally, you're kind of going to get better working with people. The whole, get to the top by climbing over the corpses of your colleagues. Gladly, there's not a lot of that in this particular industry. Empathy. I think understanding that's sort of a weakness in yourself kind of helps you understand potential weaknesses in other people, which is sort of part of empathy. And frankly, going back to especially the music thing, if music is the language of emotion, then empathy is not just an optional skill, it's mandatory. And I'll very, very quickly give you a really short story that I spent several years in the army as a musician, and when I was at the Army School of Music doing the training, we had civilian teachers, like they got really good teachers in, and we had a civilian teacher come in to teach. I was French horn, and one day our horn teacher, who was a lovely old gentleman, came in and just basically walked into the commandant's office and said, I'm taking the three horn boys out for lunch. And we were like, awesome, okay, great. We get to go off base for a little while, and he basically took us to the local pub, bought us lots of drinks and some food and everything like that. And the other two were a bit younger than me, and they were just kind of like, woohoo, this is great. And at one point I just sort of stopped and I went, Alex, this is really nice. Why are you doing this? And he sort of, he didn't actually smile, but there was a smile in his eyes. And he was kind of like, well, you're a musician. And as a musician, you're conveying emotions. You're conveying experiences. You're conveying so much to people through playing notes. It's basically another language. And you've got to be fluent in that language. And so, how can you play or write something that's about loss if you've never experienced it? How can you write about joy if you've never experienced it? And he basically said, you need to go out, you need to get drunk, you need to have fun, you need to love people, you need to lose people, you need to do crazy things, you need to do sensible things, you need to work hard, you need to be lazy. You need to understand all the possible states you may ever need to communicate to somebody else about. How can you paint a tree if you've never seen one? And this is the thing, I really think that, and again, I'm not trying to really make anybody who doesn't have imposter syndrome feel bad of like, oh no, there's all these really cool things, how do I go out and get imposter syndrome? But for me, I'm starting to realize that it is something that's very prevalent, And one of the methods of actually dealing with it is to just go, well, okay, there's some negatives. Let's stack up all the positives and see how it weighs up. Cultural issues. Spoke about that a little bit before. So this is the thing. In Australia, we actually have a thing called tall puppy syndrome. Other countries have it as well, where effectively in Australia, people who are successful at things literally get torn apart. We have a really serious cultural issue in Australia. There's a saying they have in Australia called "she'll be right, mate." And it's basically kind of like, don't worry about that. She'll be right. She will be all right is how it translates. You know, so it's like, she'll be right, mate. Not a problem. It's supposed to be, in Australia, it's supposed to be all about the, you know, everything's okay, mate. You know, fair go for everybody, etc., etc. Except it isn't. Australia's just basically brought in a policy that's locking up asylum seekers. They're not at all interested in a fair go. And in fact, at the moment, Australia's being a horribly racist country. She'll be right, mate, is actually used as an excuse for the lazy tradesman who actually didn't do the job properly because he can't be bothered. She'll be right. No, the roof's going to fall off. So we've got this double thing where it's like, if you're really achieving something, they cut you down. And if you're lazy, they go, it's okay. This is really toxic, and Australia is, I think, really, really needs an attitude adjustment over that. But from the point of imposter syndrome, basically we've got a culture over there that magnifies it. A lot of the Nordic countries have similar problems. New Zealand has similar problems. And so this is one of the interesting things, because I know a lot of people who sort of talk about Americans. Oh, Americans, they're big and bold and arrogant, and blah, blah, blah. And I actually had somebody say, oh, yeah, I've sort of heard about Marty O'Donnell. He's really arrogant, etc. And it's like, I met him last year, and I came here, and he did a keynote, and he was amazing. And he's not arrogant. I could see when he was talking about Paul McCartney, I could see the 5-year-old Marty O'Donnell standing behind him. He was excited. He'd met his hero. He's not being arrogant, he's just enjoying what he's doing. Dunning-Kruger effect. Anybody here heard of this? Only a couple of people. This one's great. I like this one, especially with what I said about Australia. Put simply, the Dunning-Kruger effect refers to people who are too stupid to realise how stupid they are. This is a real thing. And there's a little bit of a graph here that goes through it. Basically, when you don't know anything about something, you don't know how much you don't know. As you start to learn a bit about it, you go, ooh, all right, I've got a lot more to learn. And it starts to plateau. As by the time you get to being a PhD in something, it's kind of like, okay, I know a lot about this, but by this stage, I'm pretty sure I know most of what I don't know. So as people get more intelligent, they get more self-analytical. It's kind of one of the problems you get with teenagers the first time they get in a car. They all think they're Formula One drivers because they don't actually realise how much they don't know. So when the back end spins out, they've got no way of dealing with it because there's a bit of arrogance in there, but it's basically the sort of the Dunning-Kruger effect of they just don't know how much they don't know. Probably applicable to politicians globally. So, back to 5-year-old me. 5-year-old me surrounded by adults. 5-year-old me surrounded by people who are obviously far better at everything than I am. 5-year-old me surrounded by people who, in a lot of cases, I look up to. In a lot of cases, there are people who might even be my heroes. And it's a really interesting thing. I remember, I don't know where it comes from, but I know that there's a saying somewhere that says, you should never meet your heroes. Might apply to, I don't know, Hollywood stars or whatever, or just a general term. It might even be an older term that I should have looked it up. But there is a phrase that says, you should never meet your heroes. And I think it's supposed to refer to the fact that, you know, you'll be let down. You'll be disappointed. You meet your heroes, they can never live up to your expectations. I'm going to say I don't believe that. And there's a reason why I don't believe that. Because I've been coming to Game SoundCon for 5 or 6 years. And half of my heroes in my life are at this conference at one time or another. And without exception, every single one of my heroes who I have met has exceeded my expectations beyond measure. They have been welcoming, they have been supportive, they have been friendly, they have been inspiring, they have been just basically superheroes. And this industry has a lot of superheroes in it. And that sometimes can be like, oh, great, now I'm actually surrounded by superheroes. I'm not even surrounded by adults anymore. I'm surrounded by superheroes. One of them taps me on the shoulder, they're going to take my arm off. Now, going with the theme of superheroes and the specific ones that I've sort of put up here, I'm actually going to leave you with a quote from the most recent Avengers film, made by Hawkeye, guy with the bow and arrow. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, I don't have that good a memory, but basically he said this: what you did before you came into this room does not matter. Who you were before you came into this room does not matter. There are all sorts of things going on outside, some which we can control, some which we cannot. If you want to, you can stay in this room. That's fine. It's a safe choice. And nobody will think lesser of you. However, if you choose to leave this room, then you are an Avenger. And don't forget to collect your cape at the door. Thank you very much, everyone. We have a few minutes if anybody has any questions. This is a sort of topic that sometimes gets no questions, sometimes gets lots of questions. Or comments as well. Yes?
I had an epiphany when you showed the video, because I realized that what made the video so great was the vulnerability and the awareness of how meek and childlike you can be inside. So the talk you're giving about the syndrome, that's what makes some of these videos so great, is that the author has that inside them.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting, and I don't know who else has this. When I listen to pieces of music, I have a favourite piece of music that I listen to every now and again, and you know, you get new albums, etc. And over time, the effect seems to wear off, and they go sort of back into your archive collection, etc., etc. That soundtrack and that particular clip, one of the reasons why I didn't speak immediately after that clip is because I pretty much have to stop myself from bursting into tears every time I see it. There is so much magic in that film and in that clip. There's so much hope. There is so much about the small child, but it's not just the child, it's the child of the partnership. And I think it's the partnership that's the important bit. And that, you know, it's kind of like, you know, sometimes things just go really, really wrong. And yeah, the vulnerability is very much a part of that. And interestingly, one of the other films that I liked recently was Big Hero 6. Very similar sort of relationship of small child, robot, and again, and this is actually a personal thing, the particular 5-year-old in here, like the idea of flying is just off the scale as far as significant. Flying a dragon, wow. But again, you know, I'm watching Big Hero 6, I'm going, yeah, this is pretty good, blah, 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 blah. And then it gets to a bit where he goes flying with it, and I'm just like, okay, that's it, I'm done. Like, seriously, yeah. But I mean, this is the point. I think that speaks to me so well on so many levels. And because, and I think you've targeted it very well, because it deals with the vulnerability of Hiccup, the main character. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Yeah, Michael.
So a couple years ago, I was reading a book. It was a required reading for a class I was taking on director's workshop, and it's by a lady called Judith Weston. And the first chapter of this book, well, it was a forward of the book really, was about 20 pages of the negative self-thoughts that directors and actors and other creatives that she had worked with had put forward as things with their internal monologue. And I had never, until that point, realized that other people felt that same way.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say thank you for having this talk.
You are very welcome. We have a few more minutes. Anyone? Oh, yes, over back. But listen to what you said. You explained, oh yeah, my family and people who are important in society. Doctors, lawyers, people who are obviously far more important than what we do. And I understand exactly what you're saying, because that's pretty much how a lot of society looks at things. But, I mean, seriously, it's one of those interesting things. I've got a friend who's an engineer, and he's a bit of a strange one. I mean, I like him, but he has this attitude that everything that's important in the world was created by an engineer, from a bicycle to a bridge to the nuclear engine. And so engineers are completely indispensable. Artists aren't. We don't need artists. You know, they're nice, but we could do without artists. Now, I've had people sort of say, oh, well, yes, engineers create the world that we live in, but, you know, artists are what make it nice to be in. And for a while there, I even accepted that. You know what? I'm not even going to accept that anymore. I'm sorry, but the fact that every single civilization on the planet, without any exception that I'm aware of, has music. Take that away and tell me that the engineers are important. Take that away and tell me that the doctors and the lawyers are important. Take that away and tell me that anything that anybody else on this planet does would be worthwhile for a week. Seriously, switch off music for a week. See how far we go. I'm no longer going to accept that what we do is just kind of a trivial thing that is kind of enjoyment and wasting time. Music is not just a fun thing that we do to communicate. It's something that goes so far back in the history of humankind that I would really be interested to see some tests of isolating people from music for a long period of time and see what happened to them, except I would never even consider doing that to my worst enemy. So the next time somebody looks at you and sort of says, you know, oh, do you do a proper job like your cousins and your uncles and your aunts and your brothers and sisters? Go, well, I was considering doing a job like that, but I decided to do something more important. And look them in the eye when you say it. Did you want to say something?
Did you read This Is Your Brain on Music?
Nope. I guess I need to now.
It's a recording engineer who went to doctorates in neuroscience, wrote this really awesome book about how your brain is affected when you're listening to music. And that has nothing to do with what I want to say. In the book, he's talking about a colleague of his from the doctoral program was studying linguistic studies in tribal Africa, and had this realization when like in that big academic moment when you're being accepted into a tribe, they needed him to sing a song and do the dance, and he said that he was trying to communicate to them to tell them that he didn't know he doesn't sing, he doesn't know how to dance, and he's not very good at it. He's just not there. The point is that in an overwhelming number of the world languages, there's no separation between the word for speaking, dancing, and singing.
Yeah.
I think that's really fucking important to think about, that we live in a society that separates performance class from observatory class, and we separate music and performance and entertainment to people with the keys to do it, whereas most of the world still
Yeah.
does not separate.
Yeah, and I've not actually travelled to Africa, but I've travelled to some of the Pacific Islands, and on one of the Pacific Islands, like the whole village comes out, and like there's just a bunch of people, and they just wander down to the beach and sing in perfectly tuned 17-part harmony. My Lord, just like, and this is just, there's no formal education system, it's just that they've all been doing it since age 0. Yeah, I know. All right, well, that's pretty much time. I'm just going to leave you with one thought that personally, as a musician, a composer, and a sound designer and other things, there is no greater joy and no greater honour that I have than being in a room of like-minded people. And thank you all very, very much for allowing me to speak and for coming along. Thank you very much, everyone.